Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. A friend of mine sent me a video just the other day that talks about what if the US dollar collapsed literally overnight? What would happen? And I thought it would be interesting and I hope educational to do a live reaction to this video. So let's dive in. Okay, pull this up here and hopefully the sound works good.
The US dollar, one of the most powerful currencies on earth, has suddenly collapsed. Overnight, stores are shuttered, ATMs are empty, and your life savings is completely worthless. The dollar isn't just America's currency, it's the backbone of global trade. If it crashes, the effects won't stop at US borders. They will ripple across the entire planet. But would this lead to chaos in the streets or a slow economic unraveling? Would other countries bail the US out or take advantage of the collapse? We'll
Now, I'm not exactly sure how other countries would bail out the US because every country's currency is a fiat currency, of course, and those currencies are also backed by the US dollar. So if I'm in Argentina, Venezuela, these countries, they all hold dollar reserves for their own fiat currencies. So I'm not really sure if the US dollar collapsed overnight, hypothetically, how another country would bail out the US. So I don't think that's right, but let's continue. Let's continue.
reveal the fallout on today's episode of the Infographic Show. What if the dollar crashed overnight, hour by hour? Hour 1. As his alarm goes off, Jeff doesn't realize that the world he's waking up to isn't the one he remembers. It's not even the same one he fell asleep in the night before. He checks his phone and is greeted by a slew of missed calls, urgent messages from friends and family. Mixed along with them are breaking news alerts. His brain is still in the process of rebooting after a long night. Then he reads a headline that sums it all up. US dollar crashes, value plummets overnight in record-breaking collapse. Immediately, Jeff is out of bed, hurriedly rushing to his computer, booting it up.
You know what's interesting is it's hard to think about what would cause this to happen overnight. Maybe a war of sorts or some sort of bank run, but it's just really hard to believe that this could literally happen just like that. Because as we all know, when we log into Chase or Wells Fargo or Bank of America, when they show you an amount in your bank account, those are just numbers on a screen. They're actually loaning that money out constantly. So that money actually isn't there. So if for whatever reason, a significant amount of people try to withdraw their money at the same time, the whole thing would fall apart. But I'm not really sure if that's a realistic scenario. Anything could happen, but I always like to think about probabilities. What is the probability of a significant amount of people trying to withdraw a meaningful amount of money at the same time? So I'm not sure, but let's continue.
To check his bank account online. He logs in, albeit slowly, as the site is much slower than usual thanks to the sheer volume of other people also trying to log in and view the state of their money. But he manages to get through and he sees his balance. It's exactly as he left it, a modest figure with some savings set aside, barely a cent out of place. Jeff refreshes the tab, waiting anxiously for it to load into his account a second time. But once again, it works and he is greeted by the same numbers. The only difference is, now they're just that, numbers on a screen, with no meaning or value. That money in Jeff's account is literally worthless. He tries to call the bank, the line rings, then an automated voice thanks Jeff for his call. It assures him that while his query is important, the bank is experiencing a higher volume of calls than usual, and places him in the queue. There's hundreds of other callers pushing and jostling to try to get to speak with any bank employee who might pick up the call and answer all of their questions. Pacing back and forth, Jeff turns on the TV, switching the channel over to the news. The coverage of what's happening makes it look like something out of a dystopian movie. Grocery stores are packed with shoppers. Shelves have been stripped of products as people jostle and tussle with each other, some even starting full-blown fistfights over goods. But nobody can buy anything. Their money, after all, has zero value. Across the United States, stores are being looted by opportunists. All manner of chaos ensuing as people
Like, what would cause the money to have zero value? Like, I understand that things are costing us more because the government is continuing to print the currency. The government, the Treasury, the Federal Reserve, etc., they're continuing to print more currency, causing things to cost us more. So our money is becoming worth less. But I'm just like, how does it become completely worthless? I know like hyperinflation can happen, and that'll be discussed later in the video. But because we are the global reserve currency, the US dollar is the global reserve currency, we're able to manage inflation to basically print enough currency so that it doesn't get out of hand. And people notice, but they don't notice enough to cause an uproar like what happened in other countries that the video will discuss. So it's really hard to think about how the currency could just be worthless overnight. Like, I guess if there is some sort of like banking collapse and we actually can't pull out physical dollars, as I was trying to say early in the video, like credit cards, Apple Pay, none of that works at all. Um, hmm, let's just keep watching.
Struggle to process this new reality. Gas stations are preventing cars from entering and filling up at the pumps unless the drivers can fork over something valuable in exchange for fuel. It's a nightmare. Jeff opens up his wallet and takes a look at a few loose notes on hand. A crumpled 20, a few 10s, it's barely $100 in total. Panic quickly sets in, and he feels an intense tightening in his chest. Hour 2. Jerry is an economist, and he's one of many who have been woken up early with a seemingly impossible task: fixing the mess. There's a lot of urgency, verging on total panic, but Jerry is at least brushed up on his economic history, enough to know that there is a precedent for this. Not a good one, mind you. It's not the first time in human history that a country's currency has collapsed. During the 1920s, Germany saw the value of their currency drop so low that citizens were forced to use stacks of cash as kindling for fires in order to heat their homes. The money was literally worth less than firewood. Hyperinflation in Venezuela had such severe effects that the prices of simple everyday purchases like coffee doubled every 18 days. And at the height of the financial crisis in Zimbabwe, the country's government printed a $1 trillion bill to try to boost their economy. And those couldn't even match the price of a loaf of bread. Though
But you see that piece right there. The country tried to print $1 trillion bill to fix its economy. And that's what people and all of us got to realize. Printing more money is just diluting the purchasing power of the currency that's already circulating. So if the US government says we're going to create $1 trillion coin to lower the debt by $1 trillion, they're just adding $1 trillion of debt because they're creating money out of thin air. So it's more money going after the a limited amount of goods, causing the prices to rise, making the money worth less. So that's been one of the go-to playbooks of these central banks is to print more currency to fix the problem, but they're essentially pouring gas on the fire. Let's continue.
the main difference between those examples and this one is, this time it's not just one country affected. The fallout of the collapse of the dollar could be felt across the entire globe. The US dollar has long been considered the reserve currency for the whole world. To put it simply, if you were in any country in the world and offered a local resident a $100 bill, they're pretty likely to take it. They're likely able to exchange it for a pretty decent amount of their own native currency, especially if it's one that the US dollar has a positive value against. It's widely trusted that the dollar will retain a level of value, and that means that it can be used by a holder to pay for goods and services, and be exchanged for local currencies by recipients. The same can't be said for most other currencies in the world. For example, the Venezuelan bolivar is far less likely to carry that same level of trust that the dollar has internationally. A huge part of the reason the United States dollar has retained so much trust as an international reserve currency is largely because it's never been canceled. For the citizens of many countries around the world, it's not uncommon to one day wake up and find the value of your local currency has dropped dramatically.
I'm not sure we could say it's never been canceled. I think they're trying to say that the US has never defaulted, which technically isn't true. In 1934, Roosevelt confiscated everyone's gold and devalued it to the dollar, basically defaulting on the dollar and didn't allow people to own gold for many, many, many decades. And in 1971, President Nixon took us off the gold standard. Basically, the US owed so much money to other countries, they owed so much gold, other countries started to realize, well, how are you guys able to pay for these wars, the Vietnam War, et cetera, et cetera? So Nixon basically took us off the gold standard and we defaulted. We basically told other countries, hey, we're not going to give you your gold back. So just which our currency was backed by gold, right? So the US said, we're not going to give you your money back. Just keep the pieces of paper that we printed. So the US has technically defaulted twice over the last 100 years. So I'm not sure if that's what they mean, but if they're denying that, then that's technically not true.
Plenty of currencies have also been devalued over the last decade. There's the Turkish lira, the Argentine peso, pounds from Syria, Egypt, and Lebanon, the Iranian rial, and of course the aforementioned Venezuelan bolivar. Since the end of the Second World War, though, the dollar has avoided the fate of these other currencies, becoming the most widely used currency, especially for international trade. Back then, the value of the dollar was backed by the US government with gold. Using what was known as the Bretton Woods system, the gold was valued at around $35 per ounce. Having a stable value affixed to the dollar meant that the demand for US dollars increased. Even after the Bretton Woods system collapsed in 1971, the dollar remained trusted as the world's reserve currency. And ever since, there's not really been a viable alternative to it, which is why it's seen such continued widespread use into the modern day. It's been the stable foundation underneath global trade, economic expansion, and investment. And 2 hours ago, that foundation was the rug that just got pulled out from underneath almost every major industry in the world. So the likes of Jerry and his economist buddies are left trying to catch as many of the falling pieces of the tumbling structure that is collapsing on top of their heads, while also trying to determine just what can even be done about this whole situation. Needless to say, things have been looking dire from the second the dollar's value dropped to zero. Jerry's gonna have a heck of a time trying to figure out some way to get back on track, providing society hasn't collapsed entirely by lunchtime. Does anyone still get a lunch break if the money they're working to earn is worthless? Do they even bother showing up for work? Can any society even function normally during a crisis like this? Well, that's what someone else is trying to ensure. Hour 3. A gaggle of suited men and women rush through narrow corridors, hallways only ever seen by state officials and government insiders. Everyone is rushing to be somewhere, to hand some document to someone else, who will inevitably bring it before the state governor, Governor Jed. As the leader of the state's government executive branch, everyone from city mayors to average constituents are all looking to Jed for answers, and he doesn't have any of them. All Jed can focus on is maintaining order. Meanwhile, the state senator and other representatives higher up the governmental ladder can try to figure out how to move forward. Jed gets his assistants to draft up a statement to the public, assuring his constituents that the government, at both the state and federal levels, are trying to solve this crisis as quickly as they can. The US dollar isn't immune to collapsing, and it's likely that a number of factors have caused its value to drop. In a world after the 2019 COVID pandemic, the national debt of the United States has been under intense strain. As of April 2025, the US national debt has soared past $31 trillion, and it's still climbing. The COVID-19 pandemic only made things worse as the government pumped trillions into stimulus packages and emergency spending. The impact of this, combined with the liability of worsening national debt, could have been just two of the factors that contributed to the devastating decline of the dollar's value. Add to that the rise in interest rates, which, if they continue to rise, could make it more expensive for the US to borrow money from other countries. This would either lead to a default on their debt or force the US government to cut its spending. In either case, this would have a negative impact on the economy as a result. The same can be said for inflation.
I don't see the US technically defaulting on its debt, mainly because they could just print more currency, right? But obviously, that has negative effects because the debt becomes something that's incredibly unsustainable. So I don't know how the US would go about defaulting, but 3 hours into the dollar collapsing, it's just hard to believe that people, if we still have electricity, obviously, right? That there wouldn't be some sort of mutual bartering going on for something like gold or Bitcoin. Even today, Bitcoin is roughly $100,000 per coin. It's a $2 trillion asset. 19 and a half coins, roughly, out of the 21 million are in circulation right now, all over the world. So it's hard to believe that 3 hours into the dollar collapsing, people wouldn't try to move whatever money that they had physically on their person into Bitcoin or exchange it for things back and forth. Like if I have Bitcoin and you're a farmer, I will give you some of my Bitcoin so that I could buy meat, right? So I don't know. Or if someone has gold on them, it's hard to believe that we wouldn't be able to figure out that, hey, I want to buy something from you and I have and maybe an ounce of gold. And maybe I could figure out how to shave off some of the gold so I can spend it. But I don't know, 3 hours in and a video like this doesn't really acknowledge Bitcoin as a medium of exchange in a world where the dollar collapses and we all still have electricity. And it doesn't acknowledge people using gold. So I'm just like, what is this video talking about? Okay, let's continue.
which has been consistently growing, and the higher it gets, the more it erodes the value of the dollar, making it less trustworthy as the world's reserve currency. If enough countries and international trade and economic partnerships like BRICS, which includes Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Egypt, and Ethiopia, among others, were to reject the dollar for another currency, then this could be what causes the dollar itself to collapse.
So why would the BRICS nations reject the dollar? Just randomly, like why would they? I don't see how BRICS can move forward in any real way because these are countries that don't trust each other, right? So, and the dollar is the most liquid money in the world as of today. So why would the countries like not use the dollar and use something that they control because they're not going to trust each other. South Africa is not going to trust Russia. Russia is not going to trust China. China is not going to trust South Africa, and so on. So the only way these countries could trade with each other is through something like dollars, gold, or Bitcoin, right? So that's also an interesting thing, but let's get back to the video.
At any rate, that's already come to pass in this scenario. With the dollar's value now at zero, there is little chance that the US can call on other countries for a loan to bail them out. While a negotiation of some kind might be reached, we're still only
Again, how could the US call on a country to bail them out? We are the global reserve currency for better or worse. Maybe worse, clearly worse. So every currency in the world is essentially backed by US dollars. The Chinese yuan cannot just bail out the US because they would have to create trillions upon trillions of Chinese yuan, their currency, in order to bail out the US, so to speak. And by, as we saw in the video, you create trillions of dollars worth of a money, it doesn't help society. It just makes it collapse faster. So if the Chinese government needed to print so much money in order to cover the US debt, then who is buying the Chinese debt that they're printing out of nowhere? It's just going to fall on its citizens. So if something costs $20 before, after the Chinese yuan is printed to death, it'll cost $80, So printing money or another country bailing out the US just doesn't make sense because it's not possible.
a few hours into this financial fiasco. Even someone in a position of institutional executive power like Governor Jed is pretty much helpless to solve the problem at hand. All he can do is read through the statement prepared by his team before he's rushed off to a press conference where he can assure everyone that everything will be fine, all while knowing full well things are only going to get worse. Hour 12. Some of the initial rioting and looting has died down, but there are still pockets of discontented people dispersed throughout the entire U.S. In order to regain control of the population, martial law comes into effect. The government hands down orders to state representatives like Governor Jed to mandate curfews on citizens, restricting everyone's movement. The initial focus isn't just on fixing the economy, but also maintaining order and preventing civil unrest before American society tears itself apart. Earlier in the day, some retailers, like the one Jeff works for, issued a statement advising their employees to stay home and avoid coming to work. Businesses all across the country grind to an unexpected halt. After all, how can they afford to have anyone come into work if they're being paid a valueless currency? But for average workers like Jeff, it's hardly comforting being given this extra time off. There's worries over how they'll pay their bills and rent, and all that anyone will officially say is that nobody should panic and they're trying to solve the problem. Not even a full day into this crisis, and the economy is already in a wreck. The decline in the dollar's value has already had catastrophic consequences on the entire economy. The United States is quickly becoming reminiscent of 1920s Germany, which was drowning in debt following the First World War. In an attempt to pay off its debt, most of which was reparations to other countries, the German government came up with what seemed like a perfect solution: just print more money. But this caused the value of the German mark to collapse, much like in this scenario with the dollar. In fact, a similar drop in the dollar's value was seen during the pandemic, where the US government attempted to boost the economy by printing more money. Back in Germany, this led to average citizens hauling wheelbarrows full of money just to buy a loaf of bread. It's not dissimilar from what's now facing the citizens of the US after the collapse of their dollar. Before, anyone could just head to the supermarket, grab a gallon of milk, tap their debit card or Apple Pay, and be automatically charged for the goods. But now the businesses that have kept their cashiers working don't even know if they can accept dollars anymore. Most consumers are scrambling to offer whatever they have on hand in order to trade for canned food, batteries, bottles of water, desperately trying to make sure they have the basic essentials handy. If Jeff had been brave enough to show up to work, he would have immediately heard a difference in the store. The registers aren't beeping. Instead, the sounds of arguing customers, haggling, or even verbally abusing employees has drowned out all other noise. Hardly a new phenomenon, but this time it is different. This affects everyone. The same effects are felt at gas stations, with queues stretching down multiple streets to fill up their cars. But with a currency that's collapsing, how do you even price a commodity like gasoline? Ordinary people spend the first half of the day in a blind panic, realizing that their credit cards, all of the change in their wallets, have all just become useless objects. Hour 48. With every passing day, every aspect of modern life seems to be rapidly unraveling. All the recognizable structures and transactions that make up American society can't be conducted. Employers can't pay their workers the wages they're owed, and in turn, those ordinary working people can't afford to pay their bills. Meanwhile, the likes of Governor Jed are still none the wiser as to how to proceed. With no way of paying them, there's been little hope of mobilizing the state's various police departments to maintain law and order. The majority of those who are willing to work pro bono are a little too excited about a potentially lawless state, making their response to both opportunistic looters and peaceful protesters similarly overzealous. The actions of those who have injured innocent people have been condemned by Governor Jed, but as ever, there are some staunch vocal voices that want to praise such violent reactions to an unprecedented situation. Naturally, Jed can't please everyone. In a time of crisis like this, all eyes are turning to the local and federal government for answers. The people above the state governor, like Congress and the Senate, have spent the past 2 days scrambling to retake control. But how are they supposed to fix this? The regular folks who still had TVs watched the president make
Would be did that piece just say would be better off colonizing another planet? I'm just like, this video is so funny. Um, yeah, in a world where the dollar collapses, obviously I work in the movie industry, so I'm trying to like paint the picture or visualize this movie here. We still have electricity. Venmo and Apple Pay, I guess those things aren't working. People are trying to figure out how to trade with each other. Yeah, I just don't see 48 hours into a collapse like this, how people aren't using Bitcoin or gold, you know? I'm gonna continue the video since we're almost done, but this is
an address, standing at a podium in front of a hastily thrown-together press conference with U.S. flags in the background. The president and their economic advisors all assured the people that they were doing everything in their power to stabilize the situation, whatever that
obviously that's a knock on Trump right there.
means. Throughout the early hours of the crisis, emergency measures were being discussed, but naturally, there was little other countries could do to bail the U.S. out of the situation straight away. The decline in the dollar's value didn't just mean the average American's money was worthless, but it also prevented the U.S. from borrowing money from other nations. After all, how are they going to pay back a massive loan to another country and their taxpayers if the currency remains valueless? But while the economic consequences were bad enough, the lasting damage of the dollar crashing would also be felt in more ways than just financial. A fiasco like this really isn't a good look for the U.S., and the decline of the dollar could end up weakening their influence on the world stage. It would also give other countries cause to lose faith in the American government to handle themselves. With the dollar no longer holding value, it's not likely to stay the world's reserve currency, if it had even held on to that status at this point. Back during their economic crisis, Venezuela's bolivar had devalued to the point where it was worth less than toilet paper. A weak dollar could mean the same for the U.S. economy. Given the far-reaching consequences, other nations might step in hoping to stabilize the situation and help restore the dollar's value. But this uncertainty could just as easily push them in the opposite direction.
Again, other nations cannot step in and restore the dollar's value since their currencies are also backed by US dollars. I could see other countries getting together and trying to, similar in a Bretton Woods kind of way, to agree that we need a neutral reserve currency, right? So if the dollar were to collapse, I can't tell you how many hours into it this realization would come for people. Maybe 12, 24, maybe a little bit longer. But I could see a scenario where a group of countries would get together. I'm not sure how they get together or coordinate, I guess over Zoom, obviously. We don't need to do this in person anymore. But they would all get together and say, hey, we cannot have the dollar be the world reserve currency. But country A can't trust country B because they might have the world reserve currency, but they have the power to print more of it. So we would either go to gold or Bitcoin. Why I think we might go to gold first? Because gold liquidity as of today is a much bigger pool. Essentially, it's a pool, or look at it as a pool analogy. The gold analogy is like the Atlantic Ocean. The pool is huge, so people can buy large amounts of gold and sell large amounts of gold without moving the market. And gold, roughly today, the pool is about 20 to 22 trillion dollars, if you value it in dollars, obviously. And Bitcoin itself, as of today, the liquidity is $2 trillion in total. So Bitcoin's pool is a lot smaller. But I can see countries getting to the point where they say, okay, the dollar is no longer the reserve currency. Let's go back to gold in some form. Now, that would be physically difficult, obviously, because the reason we stopped using gold as a global reserve currency is because it's difficult to send and also difficult to verify. You send me gold, I need to remelt it to verify that you sent me actual gold. So we started using paper money instead, as we all know. So in the world of 2025 or 2026 or 2027 or 2030, if this were to happen, it's hard for me to see how using gold for the long term would be beneficial in a digital world. I told a friend of mine the other day, Bitcoin and gold, the difference is, if I'm going to use another random analogy, is gold is like me taking my books, 5 books with me on the airport, to the airport, going through security with all my books, my 5 books, and it's quite a pain because I physically have to carry all of those books. Bitcoin is like a Kindle. It's me with my one Kindle, and I have everything on the Kindle that I need, and it's easy to carry and easy to move from state to state. So it's hard to imagine that we could just go back to gold and it work for the long term until countries and people start realizing that it's just better to send the email essentially rather than put the mail in the post office to have it physically sent. So gold is analog, Bitcoin is digital. Gold has these uh, amazing qualities as money, but Bitcoin, you can send it instantly anywhere, and it has all of the qualities that gold has, but it's digital and you could teleport it just like that. So yeah, let's continue the video.
Faced with potential economic fallout, countries might choose isolation over cooperation, pulling back on trade not only with the US but with each other. The result would be a fractured global economy. While international help is unlikely, the US government's response isn't going to be one that favors its citizens either. Back in the 1930s, during the Great Depression, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the Gold Reserve Act of 1934, making it illegal for private US citizens to own gold. The government needed every ounce of gold they could get their hands on in order to stabilize the value of the dollar.
This is what I was talking about earlier. We essentially defaulted on people by taking their gold and revaluing it later. So the US has defaulted on its debt before by making gold illegal and making gold like you couldn't hold any amount of gold on you. You had to give it up to the US and they gave you paper money instead. And back in those days, people were a lot more trusting of the government. So they were like, okay, Roosevelt signed this into law. I'm going to take my gold to the bank and I'm going to give it to them because that's what I'm supposed to do. But I don't think that's the world we live in today, where more and more people daily are distrustful of their government and the things that they say. So let's continue.
Jerry is worried that it is entirely possible the present US government might try to seize some similar tangible asset like gold or silver, anything that its citizens have been holding on to, in the event of a financial meltdown exactly like this. They'd also likely freeze all bank accounts in order to prevent people from making mass withdrawals. Alternatively, the government might be looking at introducing price controls to prevent grocery stores and other businesses from price gouging. But despite all the uncertainty, the average
Price controls never work, and it's unfortunate to see stuff like that um, even talked about or attempted. Now, I'm not blaming the video for putting this in there because I could see that being tried, but price controls just don't work. I can't tell grocery store A that you need to charge $2 for your bread if the cost of your bread is $4. You're just going to lose money. So price controls have been tried for many years over many different governments over many decades, and it's never worked. So I could see that happening, and that would be unfortunate, but yeah, let's continue.
person knows they'll have to adapt to survive. And after all, the dollar crashing has acted as a mass equalizer. Everyone is in the same boat now. It's possible that in order to get by, citizens like Jeff might revert back to age-old methods like bartering in order to exchange goods. Neighbors with a surplus of firewood might trade that for canned food, so that those with more cans are able to heat their homes. Same could start to apply for services too. Builders and other tradesmen could help repair any damage to someone else's house in exchange for water. It seems archaic using a system like this, maybe even idealist to expect some people to get along well enough for bartering to become a viable system. But in a world where the dollar crashed overnight, it would become the most reliable way to survive. At the very least, people would be able to make it through the day by trading goods and services, at least until the dollar regains its value. If it ever does. If things really go south, don't panic. Watch What a Dollar Gets You Around the World and
So yeah, that's the end of that video. Um, I don't think it's great. I don't think it's very realistic, and I'm no fan of the US dollar, but if it collapsed overnight, like I said, I see people figuring out how to use a better version, a better money. And that's happening today, and the dollar is collapsing slowly. I want you to think about Bitcoin's price today in dollars, and that is, as Bitcoin's price goes up, that is a representation that people are becoming more aware that the dollar is worth less. Every day Bitcoin's price go up from 90K to 95 to 100 to 105. That number is a reflection of people realizing that the dollar is buying them less and less. So they're taking their time and energy and storing it in a different currency because that currency is going to grow its purchasing power in the future when you denominate it in Bitcoin. So it's just hard to believe that the dollar collapsing for whatever reason, that people within a very short period of time wouldn't turn to something like Bitcoin or gold, especially if anyone has physical dollars on their person. They could exchange those physical dollars for goods or exchange those physical dollars for Bitcoin itself. And then that Bitcoin will slowly spread to other things because people won't necessarily hoard the money in a case like this, right? If the world is getting crazy, they are going to need to buy certain things. They're going to need to buy guns, butter, bullets. You know what I mean? So I can see if people are turning to gold or Bitcoin, that the money is actually circulating around the world either way, especially if we're talking the dollar collapse and we still have electricity. We still have all the things that we used to. Our car works, you know? So the gas station would say, hey, I'll take either Bitcoin or gold. And if whoever has Bitcoin or gold, they will be able to send and receive and pay for services. So it's just really hard to believe that something like this would happen in this way, and Bitcoin or gold is not even acknowledged. But as you can see, the US debt continues to go up. We are now $37 trillion in debt. And again, that debt is a reflection of that we cannot stop this train. We will always continue to have to print money. So the ways to avoid this in the future, as this happens on a daily basis, is to continue to save in Bitcoin, just like the government is with the establishment of a strategic Bitcoin reserve. They get it, they know where the puck is headed, and it's up to us, regular folks, to try to stay ahead of the curve as well. And as you can see, the dollar is just slowly getting devalued. Because we are the global reserve currency, we're able to manage that and control it slowly. Or sometimes it happens very fast. But you can see the evolution of a $20 bill, of what it got you in 1998, and it gets you less in 2005, even less in 2014. And look at that, barely anything in 2023. And if you save in Bitcoin, it gets you more things over time because the purchasing power of that money grows, right? Because it's a fixed and finite currency. You can't make more Bitcoin. And one thing I always want to make clear to people, and I love this post from Walker, there is no red, there is no blue, there is the state, and there is you. And as you can see, I'm always trying to tell people it's not a Democrat thing, it's not a Republican thing, it's not a Trump thing, it's not a Kamala thing, it's not an Obama, it's not a Clinton thing. Regardless of who is in office, every president and government, Federal Reserve, the Treasury Secretary, they all have to print the currency. Plus 1 trillion, Bush, plus 4 trillion, Obama, plus 9 trillion, Trump, plus 7 trillion, Biden, plus 5 trillion. It doesn't matter who is in office. They have no choice but to print the currency. The taxes that we pay do not fund the government. They're run on a deficit. They basically run in a negative. If you have a house and you have bills to pay, let's say all in your bills are 5,000, but your income is 2,000. You cannot cover your bills. You're constantly in a negative every single month. So in order to do that, you keep having to borrow more money from other places. Now with the government, they're just printing more currency and they're just rolling it from one credit card to the next. And at some point, it stops. It's literally a game of musical chairs. There's more money in existence. No, there's more claims to money. There's more people that have a claim to their physical money or their digital money than there is actual money. Does that make sense? So it's like musical chairs. At some point when the music stops, everyone is going to try to get their money out of the system. So if you have a 401k, your 401k is invested in investments and you need dollars to use that 401k to pay for goods. You can't just give someone a share of your 401k and buy donuts or buy steak, right? The only thing you could do that with is Bitcoin or gold, right? So people with 401ks, people that have money locked up, they're going to need to sell a significant amount of their assets to get cash so that they could buy stuff. So there's so many people that need cash, they won't be able to get it at the same time. So that's why I always ask my friends, my family, anyone willing to listen, anyone willing to watch this long ass video, I apologize. Slowly but surely, take your time and energy out of fiat currency. And we could all avoid this by just saving in a money that cannot be printed. Save in Bitcoin, $20 a week on Strike or on Cash App or whatever amount that you feel comfortable with. So I hope that video was helpful. I hope the additional information besides the video was also helpful. I had another tab open here, and this is just a reminder too of the best performing asset over the last since 2013. Let's see if we could play this video right now.
Why do people love Bitcoin? Why do they love crypto? Well, I got to tell you something. 28% of young folks say they want it, and I'll tell you why. Going back to 2013, the number one asset, the number one performing asset, Bitcoin, 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 Bitcoin. How much? How about 315,000%? 315,000%.
You know, Charles is pretty great, but it's the number one performing asset. More and more people are realizing what it is. So please save in Bitcoin, and we could all slowly but surely avoid this. With that said, keep asking questions, keep stacking sats, and I'll catch you on the next one.